I was doing a training a couple years ago, and there was a woman sitting over to my right, and every single question I asked, she answered. She answered first. If I left a little bit of a pause after she spoke and no one else filled the pause within a few seconds, she would speak again. She answered every question I asked. She had all sorts of comments. And so I tried some of my more subtle facilitation tricks. I said, okay, good, Debbie. We're back to Debbie. Good, Debbie.
Always Debbie.
Hey, good, Debbie. Anyone else? And what that is implying is anyone other than you, Debbie, right?
I mean, shut up, Debbie.
Yeah, that's what that means. I even put my hand up a little bit, kind of, oh, good, Debbie. Anyone else? And I had my hand up a little bit, which is another facilitation trick to kind of subtly tell her that maybe you should, step back a bit. I turned to other people and did really good eye contact with the rest of the room. It didn't give her a lot of eye contact. I did all my subtle stuff, and she still kept answering every question and jumping in and using up a ton of airtime. So I said, all right, we're going to have to go to the other option of facilitation, which is you wait till break or you wait till after the meeting. And so at break, I walked over to her. Before I could say a thing, she says, oh, Mr. Nash, I need to let you know I'm helping you out here, right? Because no one will talk in this team, right? So I'm helping you out.
What a coincidence.
Yeah. So I thought, her heart's in the right place and she's trying to help. So I said, all right, let's try this. Let's do an experiment. After break, how about if you can't say anything until 3 other people have spoken each time? And then you can add your comments or your thoughts. And she said, oh, it's not going to work. It's going to be terrible. I said, no, trust me. Let's see what happens. And she goes, okay, all right. So we go back into the meeting and sure enough, I ask a question and there's dead silence. They're all looking at Debbie, waiting for her to do her thing. And she doesn't do her thing. And I looked over at Debbie and I thought her head was going to blow up. She looked pretty frustrated. But what was really cool was over the next several, maybe half hour, it just got better and better. She did her role really well. She waited till 3 people have spoken. But pretty soon people started jumping in and there was a lot more healthy silence, which gave people a chance to process and other people spoke. And by the time we got to the end of that next hour, I'd say it was a pretty balanced meeting. And it was really cool. And I went over to Debbie at the end of the day. And before I could say anything, she says, message received.
And that's a good facilitator. This sounds like a stupid question.
Probably is, because, go ahead. Skilled managers equals high morale, which equals all that cool stuff that you cannot pay for and you can't punish for.
When you close off that feedback channel, you are not going to be able to hear the truth.
In the first microseconds, your brain can't tell the difference between physical danger and what we call social danger.
I'm pissed off at you.
Me specifically?
Well, just because you're my boss and all.
Employees tend to get promoted until they reach their level of incompetence. Go forward and don't suck.
Guess who's back? Back again. Mike is back.
Okay.
So is Ethan.
Okay, Ethan. This is Mike and
Ethan.
And we are with you again with the Managing with Mind and Heart podcast from Nash Consulting,
where we help managers suck a little bit less.
Yeah,
at least that's the goal.
Yeah, well, I'd say if you're talking goal, it's not to suck a little less. Let's shoot higher than that.
Well, no, I don't know. Key to happiness in life is low expectations.
Oh, there you go.
So, anyhow, folks, welcome back. Real quickly, like I said, our goal is to try to, help you all not suck. And do our best we can do at that. What would help us help you not suck is if you could email us some topics you'd like us to cover. Like, we can assume that there's topics that you all should know, but we don't know you. So we don't know what you want us to cover. So email us, contact@nashconsulting.com. Or perhaps there's situations you're dealing with in the workplace. Email us that. We'll take a stab at it. And then, of course, know that we'll keep everything confidential. If it's your name, I'll take that out. We won't say any information that might give away what even company you work for. Nothing like that. It'll be safe. We promise. But I think that if you're having maybe an issue with it, others might as well. And so it'd be good for us to discuss. Besides that,
yeah.
Today's episode is a part 2 on running effective meetings, or I think a better name is running meetings that don't suck your soul.
That's right. We've said this last time, but meetings are not only a really important part of an organization because it's the heart of the organization, because cool things happen there. Decisions get made and collaboration happens and information gets shared. They can be really awesome and effective and even life-giving, or like you said, they can suck your soul. It can be these meetings you could have emailed me, or we're reading a PowerPoint together, or, the wrong people are there, or people are on their phones so no one's paying attention. It can be a problem. And on top of that, I could spend so much time in these terrible meetings, I'm not even getting my job done.
Yeah, exactly. As we said last episode, we often find that meetings are sometimes a microcosm of your organizational culture.
Absolutely. Yeah, you can watch a meeting and see how people relate. You can see trust or lack thereof. You can see decision making and how it's done. And do we circle around and actually never make a decision, or do we know how to make decisions? Is there follow through? Is there follow up? Is there do people meet their by whens? Almost every single aspect of a culture shows up right there in the meeting. And the good news about that is you can reverse engineer the culture in some ways by actually improving meetings.
True. Last episode, we really covered more of, let's say, the logistics of it. We talked about the ingredients that make up a well-run meeting, an effective, efficient meeting. Specifically there, we really broke down agendas, right? The importance of having an agenda, why you need to have one, how that helps participants, and then what shows up on the agenda, and how those agendas are structured, how to allocate time towards each one. Mm-hmm. What else did we cover last episode? I think
we talked about some of the things around meetings. We talked a little bit about, having the AV equipment working, and we talked about food. We talked about starting and ending on time. We talked about, lots of different sort of peripheral things around meetings as well. Talked about the facilitator role, right? Mm-hmm. And how important that is, and how, you need to train your facilitators, because that plus the agenda, those are the two things, right? The skilled facilitator and the agenda that are going to make or break that meeting.
Yep. So today's episode, we're going to hopefully tackle two different things as they relate to meetings. One is kind of some common commitments around behaviors in meetings. What is appropriate behavior? What is behavior that you should maybe shun? And essentially, what behaviors need to show up in order to make these meetings, as we keep saying, effective and efficient.
And enjoyable.
Yeah.
Meetings can be enjoyable. Yeah, so our first topic really is code of conduct, common commitments. What would you want your employees to be committed to doing and not doing in meetings to make those meetings effective? Exactly. And then Ethan, our second topic today.
And then we'll also dive into the role of the facilitator a little bit more.
Yeah, some skills.
Last episode we talked about kind of the importance of that, but let's talk about what actually is that facilitator doing in these meetings that help guide them along, to help keep them on track, to help keep people engaged, to make sure people aren't getting disenfranchised. I mean, the responsibility of the facilitator in a meeting is quite a burden in a way, because you really do have the responsibility to make sure that what is supposed to be getting done in these meetings are getting done. And that involves including everybody that's sitting there at the table.
Yeah.
Now, I want to talk about just a really kind of interesting study that I think frames this podcast episode well, with the two topics that we're going to cover today. Now, I found this in a pretty exciting new book, at least in my opinion, called The Culture Code.
Yes.
By, I think it's Daniel Coyle.
Is that right?
Yeah. I really love this book. It talks about a lot of the same principles that we teach in our classes when it comes to group culture. There was a gentleman of the name of Will Phelps. And so anyways, Will Phelps, he studies organizational behavior in Australia at a university there. He set up a really cool experiment. So he would have essentially a Confederate come sit in at different organizational meetings. Okay, so the Confederate would either put on the hat of one of three different roles. Either the jerk, the slacker or the downer?
I have totally read this. I forgot about this.
Yeah,
this is awesome.
So, the downer, for instance, in the meeting, they'll act, pretty quiet. They'll get tired. Eventually they'll put their head down on the table.
They sigh.
They sigh. So eventually other people, they would find, in all cases, eventually other people would shut down. They would start doing the same. And then, 20 minutes into the meeting, you would have 2 or 3 people with their heads down on the table as well. Okay. And so they actually found that having this person in the workplace or in the meetings, either the jerk, the slacker, or the downer, reduces the quality of a group's performance in that meeting by 30 to 40%.
What did the jerk do in the meeting?
So the jerk would be someone that more...
I want to do that. I want to be that guy that gets to go in and be a jerk.
Well, you do great at that.
Yeah. Thanks, Ethan.
Well, you're a great actor.
Oh, okay.
The jerk would just kind of like, huff and puff at, or that's a dumb idea, or like, let me tell you how this is done, jerky behavior. Yeah. Anyways, in most cases, no one got upset at the Confederate. People just kind of conformed.
Wow.
So I think that's the first lesson to take away that relates to what we're talking about today. In most cases, people just let these bad behaviors in a meeting happen.
And they impact them.
It
affects them.
Yeah, exactly. This happened except for one group. Literally one group. Nothing could bring down this group, and it was mostly because of one guy who was described kind of as the facilitator of this group.
Oh.
He wasn't necessarily the manager, the leader, but he was the facilitator. So, for instance, the Confederate would start acting like a jerk. He would instead respond instantly with warmth and deflect the negativity, right? So immediately kind of made this situation feel safe.
Wow.
Then he got other people involved and engaged by essentially saying, hey, this is all really comfortable and engaging. I'm curious what everybody else has to say. So as the Confederate would keep trying to bring it down, he kept bringing the energy up and kept reaching out to get people engaged. Energy levels increased. People began sharing ideas. People would cooperate. They felt safe.
That's amazing. Yeah. I love that story.
And the last thing I'll add is just that, the surprise for me was that he wasn't taking any of the actions you normally associate with a strong leader, right? He didn't take charge or tell anybody what to do or even tell that person to shut up in front of everybody or whatever. He instead created just conditions for others to perform, really constructing an environment that was crystal clear that we here are solidly connected. So that group succeeded
despite that character.
Despite the character, because of the way he was able to facilitate and let people know, whether directly or indirectly, that this is a safe environment for us to share ideas, communicate, regardless of this jerk / downer / slacker.
Dude, mic drop. I mean,
boom.
That's the end of the podcast. We could be done right now. That was really good. That's a great story, and I am...
Thank you. I wrote it myself.
You did not. I was watching you look at it while you were saying it. But I tell you what, I'm stealing that, and that is going to show up in the very next 5-day training when we get to the section on meetings. Note to our audience, we do have a 5-day training for managers. Just look us up.
Mm-hmm.
But hey, yeah, that story really illustrates both of our topics just beautifully, right? It's the topic of sort of the behaviors that work and don't work and the behaviors that we should expect, and then facilitation skills.
Right.
So go ahead.
Well, I'm just going to say the same thing. Let's jump into one of these topics.
All right. So let's dig into this sort of code of conduct, or what are those behaviors that we would like our employees or our group members to bring, and what would be those behaviors we do not want to see, because those behaviors would detract and distract and cause us to have not an effective meeting. So let me just start asking you, Ethan, if you're running a meeting or you're the facilitator and your perfect world, what are some behaviors that you would not want to see occurring? If you could just magically make sure that all the employees did what you wanted, what would be behaviors you would not like to see?
The first one that comes to mind is people on their laptops and or doing any other type of work.
Oh, could you have started with an easier one? No, I'm just kidding. That's
an easy one to me.
Well, it should be, but I tell you what, I cannot tell you the number of hours we've spent on this topic with people. it's really hard because, you and I will probably agree, right? What's your what would be your hope?
My hope would be that everybody essentially has their laptop away.
Not on their phone.
Not on their phone, or that should be a given.
Yep.
And those that are on their laptop, it's clear that they need it for that. They have to show the group a specific presentation or someone's note keeping. But other than that, laptops are closed.
Yep. So let's take a few minutes on this one because this really is a thing in the workplace. It's something that gets talked about over and over again. I'm going to agree with Ethan. Bottom line for me, and I've seen, trust me, listeners, I've seen this work. I've seen organizations where they have literally said, with a few exceptions, which we'll circle back to, we are not using electronics in meetings. Mm-hmm. There are meetings where they literally say you put your phone in the middle of the table and you can't access it.
That's a little obsessive.
There's one meeting where they literally, I'm not advocating this, but there was literally a hanging like pockets on the wall with people's names on them. You were supposed to put your phone in the pocket before you came to the.
Wow.
It's a little grade schoolish, but
yeah.
But I'm not recommending communism, right?
Yeah,
over control. But in reality, one of the commitments we can make to one another if we're trying to make our meetings really effective is you're going to be present and you're going to be at this meeting and you're not going to be doing other things,
right? I'll even just kind of bring this back to the episode we did on just good listening skills. Those apply in a meeting situation as well, right? Putting your phone away, being engaged, asking follow-up questions. And it's hard to do any of those things when you're on your computer.
Yeah. And let's be realistic, right? Some of the reasons why people have phones and computers, and we talked about this last time, is I'm in way too many meetings and I have no time to get my work done. And this particular meeting doesn't even interest me, or I really shouldn't even have to be here, but no one told me that. My name's on on the invite, so I showed up, and other people are doing it. There's all these reasons why we do, why we use phones, and I just think it's a matter of stepping back, and we'll talk about this a little bit later here today, but creating a code of conduct for you and your team members and just agreeing together that we're, my part of the job as the facilitator is to plan a good meeting and to have relevant people here and make this work worth your time. Your job is to show up and be here and be present and not use phones and, laptops. And then you're right. There's some exceptions. This person's keeping notes. Although I'll say, there's a little bit of an honor system going here. If you say you're keeping notes on this meeting, please be doing that, because the fact that you're still typing and no one's talking, I think you're doing something else. I think you're doing emails. Yeah. And I've seen it. I've seen, in my trainings, I've had people say I'm keeping notes, and during break, I've seen Facebook, on their computer. So, there's an exception. I've had people say, well, wait, I'm so important. And I don't mean that sarcastically, but I need to be reachable in this certain case, or even, I might have some kids at home that might reach me. Sure. Okay. Have your phone available. Our rule is if something comes up and you need to step out of the room and take care of something, step out of the room and take care of it. Mm-hmm. Don't sit here in the meeting and text.
Mm-hmm. So understood. All right. Understood loud and clear.
All right. What's another one? What's another behavior that you would like to not be seeing in meetings?
Any sort of that stupid. Why would you say that type of behavior?
Yeah, this is a broad category, right?
I said last episode that, having a meeting culture where there's no sort of consequences for ideas or suggestions that you throw out there, right? It doesn't mean every suggestion or idea you're throwing out there needs to be enacted or something like that.
Yeah, we're not going to adopt every idea.
Right? But it just means that as soon as there's someone in the meeting, like maybe the jerk in that study I was talking about, that kind of huffs and puffs at what you say.
Rolls their eyes.
Oh my God. Or like, okay, that's not quite right type thing, right? That's going to shut that person down. And everybody that's witnessing that is probably going to be shut down as well.
Yeah, and there's a lot of side notes we can make here, but we're talking about adaptive skills. We're talking about emotional IQ. We're talking about things like the ability to disagree with grace, as opposed to disagreeing in a way that makes the person feel insulted, Yeah. We're talking about behavior styles. Are you aware, is this person aware that when they disagree, they sound mad or they sound aggressive or they sound sarcastic?
I am aware of that, yes.
Okay. You're not aware maybe in that situation that you are coming across angry, but half the room might feel that or experience that as anger, and anger always shuts people down, right?
Yeah.
So there's a behavior style adjustment. Am I, maybe learning a different way to engage, a different way to disagree?
Sure. Yeah, disagreeing is not the same thing as, shutting someone down.
Oh, no.
Right? No. Again, with the five dysfunctions of a team, they talk about one of the healthy behaviors is organizations and groups that are able to disagree with each other, disagree and move on.
Well, disagree and use that disagreement as a way to get to a better decision, right? Disagreeing is super healthy. So what you're getting at is it's not going to be helpful for someone to show up and be aggressive, be dismissive, be sarcastic. So yeah, there's a behavior right there. Let me do one or two. How about sidebars, right? The people that just start turning and talking while other people are talking or while the facilitator is facilitating. As a leader, as a facilitator, it's super distracting, and it causes me as a facilitator to I'm instantly having to make a decision.
Right.
Do I repeat what I just said because they missed it? Do I pause for a minute till they're done? Others get distracted. And here's a funny thing about this. I've asked groups many times. I say, raise your hand if you tend to get distracted and annoyed when people do sidebars. Everybody raises their hand.
Sure.
Literally, including the very people that I watched do sidebars 5 times.
Right.
In that meeting.
Right. This one, in just my opinion, I do think this is not necessarily black and white, like either there's sidebars or not sidebars. I do think that there is, as the facilitator, we'll get into this, I think there's a healthy amount of sidebar conversations to allow and what not to allow. Now, obviously, if people are just going on and on over in this corner, not a good idea. And if everybody's doing it all the time, not a good idea. But as things are being discussed and ideas are being thrown around or there's brainstorming, for someone to kind of, check in with the person next to them and be like, did we talk about that? Or, ooh, should I, these little comments. I've seen a facilitator kind of shut down a meeting because it was like any chirp from somebody that wasn't directed to everybody was a sign of a meeting culture that they did not want to have.
Yeah, you and I might land in different places on this one, and that's okay. I think the code of conduct that we need to commit to is a couple things, right? If instead of turning and talking with someone else, because frankly, it really is distracting, and others get distracted, the leader gets distracted. I would encourage a couple things. I would encourage that person to ask a question, to speak up. I really encourage the facilitator to really, and this is where facilitation skills and this code of conduct really come together, because the facilitator can create an environment where there is actually room for lots more discussion, and there's more pauses and more time and lots more turn and talks and things that you do that make it less likely that people are going to need to actually turn and talk when somebody else is talking. And that's the key. If you're in brainstorm mode or lots of people are kind of, popcorning, ideas here and there, I'm okay with lots of those turning, what you might call sidebars. But when somebody else is speaking, that's an interruption. And I think that is really hard to say, well, we're going to allow that sometimes and allow not. So for me, I think the default mode needs to be, we're not going to interrupt other people and we're not going to talk when someone's talking. Yes, there'll be some exceptions. And as a facilitator, you'll probably allow, like you said, a little bit of it.
Right.
But if it's a commitment to not to do that, I think that's the bottom line.
Sure. Commitment to not do that. I think with all these things, there's kind of a level of emotional intelligence involved, right, where someone just quickly needed to whisper something because they had a question about what they were maybe on the agenda. I don't know. It doesn't really matter what it is. I just think that as a general rule, no sidebar conversations, but you don't want to get to a level where you're a dictator about it. No,
and let's just assume that's true for everything. And we probably don't even need to say that. All the things we're going to talk about right now, we're not asking the facilitator to be like, stop. That we're not saying that. We're saying
waiting to catch someone talking on the side.
Right. I guess I don't want to. Let's just assume right now that we'll have exceptions to all these rules. But if you don't have the code of conduct to start with, then you don't have anything to start with. It's a kind of a free for all. What's interesting is when I check in on what people are talking about, like I would say 90% of the time, if not more, what they're talking about literally is what we're talking about, which tells me that we're still on track and that people are engaged. As a facilitator, maybe I need to leave a little bit more space, right, for people to, speak up and turn and talk. So Here, one more, and then we'll take turns here. I think we addressed this earlier in our story. It's the airtime. It's just watch your airtime, and it's hard to monitor yourself. We're not always aware of the way we're showing up. I like to call this airtime math. Right? You got a group of 5 people. What percentage of time do you get? Math, Ethan?
5 people.
5 people.
Okay, you get
20%. And we're not asking you to be that rigid. Don't get out a Excel sheet or a calculator. But generally speaking, on both ends of the equation, if you're an overtalker or an out loud processor and you've got all sorts of answers to every question, your job is to pull back a little bit and remember that it's very likely that you're helping to contribute to someone else's disenfranchisement.
Yeah. Going back to that opening story of this episode, a silence does not mean that nothing's happening.
Oh, good.
Right?
Good point.
Silence is good. Silence is healthy. People need silence to process. And although for some people, all silences seem to be awkward silences for them.
Yep. And they have to fill them.
Yeah. Let the power of silence be there.
That's really good. And so the person who overtalks or says too much, uses too much airtime, they need to practice being comfortable with silence, allowing it, pulling back. Sometimes I'll say to someone who I'm coaching, I'll say, look, you've got all sorts of great things to say. What if you just said to yourself, every other one I'm not going to say?
Yeah. Now, here's a story of somebody that I knew, someone I used to work with in the workplace. You would have our weekly manager meetings, and she was given a lot of feedback on this. Hey, you just take up way too much airtime in the meetings, right? And every silence is a chance for you to speak again. Sounds very similar to the person that you were describing.
Debbie?
Right? Let's call her Debbie, okay. Right? That's as creative as we can get with names. But anyways, she took the feedback well, and she really worked hard on making sure that she was allowing other people to speak in meetings and that she wasn't just jumping in on every opportunity when there was a silence. It was so hilarious watching her, though, for a few weeks, a few months even, because she was holding back. She wasn't saying anything, but it was literally like you can see the words just about to just burst out of her.
Right,
like,
her face is red.
Her hands are kind of going up in the air. Her lips are like starting to move, but she's like almost putting her hand over her mouth to like keep it out. And, we all joked about it openly with her. We're like, you're doing a great job of not talking, but I can see that this takes so much self-control. And that's it. It does take self-control, but your meetings are going to be better off for it.
Yeah, and that person who is holding back, just a note to that person, Debbie, as you're sitting there trying not to say something, keep working on it and even work on some of that body language because you're still pretty loud, with quotes around the word loud. Everyone's seeing it. And I've watched people get more airtime by just looking like they have something to say, right?
Right.
Now, we've got the other end of that equation, the person who doesn't participate.
Right. No matter how much silence you give them.
Yeah. And this is a little trickier because, we're not going to have some kind of weird mandate that everyone has to use 20% of the time. People are, different behavior styles. They have different levels of investment or opinions in that topic. That's fine. I just would say if you're somebody who tends to not speak up, not participate, just push yourself. That's all I say. Push yourself. Take some of those silent moments. If you hate jumping in a discussion because you're afraid of interrupting, which is about a quarter of the population, practice, some body language where you kind of put your hand up a little bit, which gives the facilitator a clue that, this person has something they want to say.
Yeah. Now, with all of these do's and don'ts and kind of the common commitments that we would recommend that meeting cultures adopt, how should you go about setting these expectations with your team? Is this a meeting of itself where everybody kind of brainstorms on what do we want our meeting cultures to look like? And then would you recommend kind of writing a list and keeping it up on the meeting space? Or what's the best way to make sure that this happens?
That's a good question. We've got more I want to list here, but let's take a minute on that. This is tricky. And we're going to do our episode on decision-making styles, so that this will make more sense then. But I would say this wouldn't be what we call a style one, right? Where the leader just says, here's our code of conduct. Here's what I expect. I just don't think that's the best way to get to this. I would think that, first of all, getting to this would be a really good group discussion. This would be, I've probably done 200 of these specific discussions and watched a group come up with their code of conduct, and they're almost all the same.
Yeah.
They're almost identical. And so you trust the wisdom of the group on this one. Managers, have a discussion. This would be a case where you'd say, hey, let's talk about our do's and our don'ts for our code of conduct in meetings. Get them in small groups. Have those small groups design it, each group separately, come back together, get that up on the board, make some decisions together as a group, and that's what we've decided. Now you take that, you go type it up, you create a document. That does now become a thing that we're going to enforce. That's something that we're all going to agree to, and the facilitator is going to hold you accountable, and you're hopefully going to hold each other accountable and yourself. And a lot of groups have taken that list and put it right on the back of their meeting agenda, and it's right there for them to look at.
Yeah. Yeah, and again, I've seen it just kind of a, kind of a poster board put up on the wall because they always have a meeting in the same room. So it's easier to just kind of go, oh, hey, remember? And they look.
Yep.
And you point at the wall where the common commitments are at, and they say, oh, okay, yeah, sorry.
Yeah, and here's where I've actually seen it not work, and it can be a little cynical or create cynicism is, you join a team, they did that exercise maybe, a year, 2 years ago. They created their code of conduct for meetings. You don't hear anything about it. You just see it on a wall. It doesn't work anymore. And no one comes to a meeting and goes, oh, it says on the wall, be respectful. Oh, okay, I'll stop interrupting people. It doesn't work. So if you're going to create a code of conduct, you got to keep it alive. You've got to be sustaining it by revisiting it every so often, reading it together, not just because there's been a problem either. Every quarter, whatever frequency you think is best for you and your team, go over it, see if there's anything we want to add or subtract. So that's a big thing, guys. Keep that document alive.
Yeah. And I'll add one more suggestion here. So just as extra credit, as you're kind of working with your team to figure out, hey, how do we want our meetings to go, and what are the expectations of them? You might even start out with some sort of evaluation or survey that everybody fills out individually about how meetings are going. And then after getting those, you can all come together and talk about it and figure out, what are we going to do and what are we not going to do? So
yeah, I want to say about that. That's a really great idea, and it could be a written thing like you just described, or I've seen it be really effective where you just have a meeting and it's all about that, and you go in small groups and you say the question for your small groups is what's working well and what's not working well, and then let's get together and talk about it. I actually prefer that because you're doing it right there together in the room.
Sure, yeah. I love having meetings about meetings.
Let's have a meeting about the meeting to plan the meeting.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure this is a Dilbert cartoon.
So we've talked about some don'ts, right? We've talked about the sidebars and the phones and the don't use too much airtime. We could throw
not shutting people down.
It was implied, I guess. Don't interrupt, right? Don't wait your turn. On the positive end, we have the opposite of those things, right? Wait your turn. Use airtime math.
Encourage people to speak and reward them when they are speaking up.
Yeah, say, I love that idea. Or when you do disagree, say something like, hey, that makes sense. Here's another way of looking at it.
Or I'm so glad you brought that up. Here's why I think a little bit differently on that.
Yep. So a couple more do's, right? Obvious stuff. Show up on time.
Show up on time.
Be ready.
On time is late. 10 minutes early is on time.
Yeah, it's not going to work in any organization I've been to. But yeah, be on time and be ready to go. And that includes things like if you were supposed to read the agenda or read some other supplementary data, be ready, be prepared, show up. A couple more do's, things you'd want people to do, be thinking about why they should when they come to that meeting.
Do review the agenda before the meeting.
I just said that.
Okay. Just making sure.
Okay.
Sorry. I zoned out for a second.
Also review the agenda.
Okay.
Before you show up.
That's a good idea. I wish I thought of that first.
All right. So we got the read the agenda thing down. One thing to think about is sometimes when people are creating these code of conducts, they say be respectful, right? That's always, in fact, it's always said. Obviously, clearly, be respectful. It's fine. It's just not enough. You may remember from one of our early podcasts, respect is not a behavior. Disrespect is not a behavior. And so it's a great headline, right? If in the do call
feeling,
respect is a summary and interpretation of a lot of behaviors, right? So it doesn't help anyone. Like no one goes again to a meeting and says, "Oh, be respectful." Oh, therefore I will not interrupt and I will use enough air. I mean, people don't translate. They just think be nice, right? So if you're going to make this code of conduct together as a group and someone says be respectful, reward that contribution and say yes, but let's make that the headline. That's the top of the list under the do's, but everything underneath it is going to support that, like wait your turn, don't interrupt, disagree with grace, don't do other work in the meeting. These are all respectful behaviors, right?
Here's another behavior is, we talked about this on the other end of it, but do disagree if you disagree.
Yeah, you know what? You're right. Not just disagree with grace, but totally forgot authenticity, right? Bring your actual opinions to the meeting, because if you don't, you're going to have the meeting after the meeting, right? You're going to be triangulating about it later. So yeah, bring your actual thoughts. Now I know that that's scary if you're in an environment that feels less safe.
Yeah,
and if there's a power differential. I mean, so there's some broader things to think about. But yeah, in my perfect world, people are showing up with their actual opinions.
Well, what do you think? I feel like that's a good amount of do's and don'ts to get people started. Again, this is going to be personalized for your group. So take some of these as suggestions and then come up with your own.
Yeah, with your group. Do this work together. It's actually a really fun activity.
Yeah. That being said, we keep going back to the facilitator and how important that is. We really just need to talk about the facilitator. And not only what behaviors they should be displaying, but as well as the skills that a good facilitator should have.
Yeah, let's get into that. To reiterate something from last time, it's the role of the facilitator is key, and that's an obvious statement, to a meeting being effective and enjoyable and efficient. It's that person coupled with a great agenda that's going to make this work. So again, a shout out or an encouragement to organizations, please invest some time and energy into training your facilitators. So facilitator, think about the roles. It's almost to me a combination of, if you could sort of combine the jobs of an air traffic controller with a coach on the sidelines who's allowing the game to go on, with the referee who's not playing the game necessarily, but they're facilitating the game, with an orchestra conductor. I mean, you could put all these analogies together. It's a pretty tricky role. So, number one, plan a good meeting. Listen to the last podcast on that. You show up now, the meeting's been planned, the agenda's great. Your job, obviously, primarily, is to let that agenda drive the meeting.
Right.
You're the person who's supposed to utilize that agenda. And here's a hint. When you depart from your agenda and don't say anything about it, you just start ignoring it, you have just taught everyone that we are not using agendas anymore.
Yeah. Agendas are bull crap.
It becomes a free-for-all. The agenda is a waste of time in creating it. That you wasted your time. If you're not going to use your agenda, don't have an agenda, right? But if you're going to
do have an agenda.
Yeah, don't. You know what I mean? Have an agenda, because that's going to allow. It's, first of all, folks, you've all been in meetings that either don't have agendas or they're not used. It's frustrating, and you spin around and you don't make decisions. Okay, so the facilitator's job, with hopefully the help of a timekeeper, which we talked about last time, is to keep us on target, right? And so, hey guys, looks like we have just a couple minutes left on this topic, and it's okay to jump in and say that, right? So, and you might say, all right, so, we are only halfway through this, and we actually have to do this today. So let's take a minute and figure out what we're going to bump on the agenda. Let's make an adjustment.
Gotcha. So the facilitation skill that we're talking about right now is just the pretty simple one, the ability to use the agenda to guide the meeting.
Yes.
And to stick with that.
Yes.
As I said last episode, the agenda is really kind of like the compass for that meeting, and the facilitator is the person that's supposed to be reading that compass, and making sure we're going in the right direction.
They're guiding you through the forest using the compass. And I know that sounds simplistic and easy, but everyone out there who's led meetings knows that this is not easy, because participants are going to go sideways and, change subjects or go on rabbit trails, or you're not going to be done. So yeah, that's one of the roles of a facilitator right there.
Okay. And outside of that skill, and actually before I jump into that, I got a quick question for you.
Yeah.
Who who should the facilitator be?
Yeah.
Like, should it be the manager or leader of the group or the most senior person, or can it just be someone that just seems to be skilled at, being the conductor in this
orchestra?
An orchestra. Yeah. Right.
The answer is yes. I know that's confusing, but default mode, if you are the person who is the manager of that team, or you're the project manager of that project, my default mode is you need to be the facilitator. So
what if you suck?
Well, we'll get to that. But
okay.
but the facilitator needs to also be the person who has single point accountability for decisions. And so, for example, who's the person who can say, we're going to use a style 3 decision, which again, we'll talk about later. Well, it's the person who has authority in that group. Who's the person who can say, hey, we really do need to get to this decision right now because I need to take this decision and do this with it. There's just a lot of reasons why the person facilitating also was probably the person who created the agenda. They created the agenda in part from the requests that came to them from the employees, right? They're the ones who can make those decisions. Is this an agenda item, or are we going to wait and do this another time? So my default mode is let the person who is the leader of that project or that department be the facilitator. Exceptions. I might have somebody who I want them to develop their facilitation skills, and we're going to occasionally let them do that. Mm-hmm. Another exception. This piece of the meeting, I'm going to give the facilitation away for this piece because the employee who wants to, talk about this or needs to make a decision, let them facilitate this piece, right? And then back to your question. I'm a manager and I'm just a terrible facilitator.
Right.
Obviously, my main answer is, get some training. That to me, that's part of developing as a manager is get some training. Right. As a stopgap, maybe have somebody assist you in facilitating. Mm-hmm. So.
Now, another, I think, obvious skill that a facilitator has, as we've said already, is the ability to keep participants engaged and be able to recognize when people might be checking out, be able to recognize when people might be taking up too much of the space in the airtime, and then the ability to bring people together and allow them to communicate effectively.
Yeah, let's start with the first thing you said. Like, what are facilitator behaviors that keep people engaged, right? Mm-hmm. I keep going back to things like this. Plan a good meeting, number one.
Sure.
Have the right people there, all the stuff we talked about. But now you're in the meeting itself. Man, ask questions. I know this seems obvious, but ask good questions. Mm-hmm. And consider breaking people into groups. And this is something that I push on a lot in trainings because I noticed that manager or leaders, they'll think about doing small groups if they're doing a quote training, but they have a really hard time, I think, getting their head around the idea that an actual staff meeting is a great place to have small groups.
Small group conversations, small group brainstorming.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, even as I said last episode, when they, did the study at Microsoft, people found a lot more satisfaction in meetings with smaller groups, right? 2 to 3 people. Well, obviously, you can't always have meetings that small, but what you can do is be able to break people out into small groups and allow them to interact that way.
And let's talk about some of the rationale for that. So what do you think the percentage is of people in a larger meeting? And I'm going to say, let's say 20 people. Ugh. What percentage of those people? It's not because here's...
Sorry.
Well, no, seriously, I've got... Most of the groups I work with are staff teams that are big, and you have to meet. It's just
Well, I know it's a reality. It still is just a lot of people getting into the room.
Yeah, but I think it can be really fun and enjoyable. And here's one of the ways you do it. If I ask a question to 20 people, what percentage of them are going to speak up? According to research, it's about 25%, 20 to 25%. So I've asked a question, even with some, I've left a little bit of room, some opening, some silence. You're going to have 5, 6, 7 people say something. I had a guy one time, I was watching his meeting. He had probably 15 to 20 people in the room. He had this discussion. I swear that 4 people, maybe 5, participated. And they happened to be sitting in different parts of the room. But these 4 or 5 people were participating. And afterwards he goes, that was a really good discussion. And I go, no, that was not a real good discussion.
The same people.
15 people sat there and didn't say anything.
Right.
Now, what percentage of people will speak up in a small group of 3 or 4? 100%. Mm-hmm. They will all participate. And you remember, you got your processors who may not feel free to speak up in a group of 20, but they will sit there and they will talk in a group of 4 or 5. And so there's all these opportunities in meetings to say, look, we're going to be together brainstorming this topic. So let's first take 5 or 10 minutes in a small group. Here's the question I want you to consider, talk about it. Well, now you got all these people in these small groups participating and they have their skin in the game. Now you come back together. I don't need every person in the large group now to speak up because everyone feels represented, and more people will speak up because they've had time to process.
Sure.
Right? So I'm just such a believer in, both sort of turn and talk to the person next to you, or let's get into some quick, 3 or 4 or 5 person groups. When you talk about engaging people and having a great meeting, please don't forget small groups.
Right. So again, facilitator skill is to keep people engaged, and there's lots of different ways and tactics for doing that. Again, I'll bring you back to the opening or the study that I talked about earlier. One way to keep people engaged is to, meet negativity often with positivity. Meaning don't let that kind of negativity take over the meeting, but find a way to navigate that and get people involved in a discussion around it.
Yeah. So somebody says, "Oh, that's not going to work." You could say, "Hey, you know what? I'm glad you said that. Let's take a few minutes and talk about the downside of this decision.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the cons.
Yeah.
What might be the roadblocks, or what might
right, and be able to say, I think it's actually a great idea to talk about the cons. We think we should be thinking about these things ahead of time. Who has anybody has some ideas of why it might work though?
After you've discussed the cons,
it's just different ways to navigate it.
Yeah, and what's cool about that is you've kind of leaned into the person who's just kind of throwing out this negative bomb, and you've said, "Oh, that's actually a thing we should talk about," and you've joined him in that. You've asked others to participate. It kind of takes the wind out of their sails in a good way if they were just trying to be negative, right?
Sure.
And then you're right. Then you turn to look. Okay, so these are the cons. These are the problems. Let's talk about some solutions. Let's talk about the pros. Another engagement thing is to just keep things moving, in the sense of when is it too much time spent on that particular topic, or when are we now starting to spin, right? So, hey, you guys, we're gonna give this a couple more minutes, or hey, let's go ahead and move on to the next part of this topic, moving us ahead. And with that, I got lots to say here. It's decisions. Facilitators have to help us actually make the decision.
Okay.
That's a big piece right there.
Well, do you want to talk about that now?
Yeah. Again, we'll be talking about decisions later, but here's the thing. If we decided that today we're going to make a decision and we've given ourselves, I'm going to say half an hour, because we need that much time for this particular decision, or 20 minutes or whatever it is, you're going to have to kind of think about, and I think you mentioned this last time, Ethan, you're going to have to be thinking about what are the phases of that decision-making process, during that 20-minute period. Well, we're going to give 10 minutes to, 7 minutes to small groups. And then we're going to get 12 minutes to speaking those things out loud and writing some things on the board. And we're going to give a couple of minutes for sorting and whatever it might be. And we'll talk about that later. But the idea is, as the facilitator, your job is to keep things moving and then say things like, all right, have we decided? Let's be really clear. Is this what we're deciding? Now, at the end of the meeting, remember ABCDs, you're going to get to review that.
Let's remind them what those are.
At the end of the meeting, right, we're going to mention action plans. By wins.
B, by wins.
Yep. C is communication items.
And D is the decide. What did we decide on?
What did we decide, right? So you're going to wrap that stuff up at the end of the meeting.
Every single meeting.
Yes. Almost.
Yes.
There's always exceptions, right?
Don't get me started.
But during the process, right, the facilitator is getting us to that decision. Or let's say it wasn't that kind of decision. It wasn't, we are going to decide today. It's actually super valid to have a 10-minute section in your meeting where you're going to be giving the decision maker all your opinions and all your ideas, and that person's going to later on take that information and make a decision. Well, make sure that's super clear. Facilitator, all right, so we're going to spend the next 5 minutes in small groups talking about this, and we're going to spend 5 minutes speaking out loud about all the things we think. This person here, or me, who needs to make this decision next week, I'm going to be writing down all the stuff you guys are saying, and then our time is done. Our 10 minutes is over. Thank you for that data. Now we're going to move on. So there's the facilitator's job, is to know how we're deciding and keep that moving and make sure we stay on point.
I see.
Yeah. So talking about dealing with difficult behaviors, we've got this code of conduct, right? These behaviors that people have said we want to be doing and not doing. As a facilitator, what do you do when people are breaking the rules, right? How do you intervene? One level of intervention is super subtle, right? It's just, hey, anyone else? Or
what you were talking about earlier with Debbie.
Yeah, hey, Debbie. Yeah, good job, Debbie. Anyone else?
Who else has something to say here?
Right. Another subtle approach would be, hey, let's break into small groups really quick and discuss this, right? You might do that because either you're getting nothing, it's just dead, right? Or it's a lot of everyone talking at once, or there's some interrupting. There's a bunch of cool things you can do that are just, you're not really pointing out the problem. You're just doing something to make that better. Here's another one. Hey guys, let's take a quick stretch break. Bio break, 3-minute bio break. Let's take a quick, that might help if we're getting antsy or, whatever.
Diffuse the situation, maybe.
Right. You might stand up and write something on the board and say, okay, hold on everybody. Let's start here and go to here, right? That can save us from some rabbit trails or, some other kind of chaos that might be happening in the room.
Okay.
So that's one level of intervention. We call that.
Let's talk about that last one you just mentioned again. I'm having a hard time relating that back. We were talking about bad meeting behaviors. So what do you write what up on the board?
Well, what I guess I'm getting at is if people are starting to get off track, they're starting to go on to different topics.
I see.
There's some sort of chaos, or people are feeling a little confused, and so you see even so the mood starts to drop. It's like, in a sense, you're taking more control now. You say, hey, okay, hold on, everybody. Let's put A, B, and C up here. These are the 3 things we've covered so far. Mm-hmm. So again, these facilitating behaviors often or skills are often employed there to deal with maybe some problems that are happening in the meeting.
Sure. So dealing with difficult meeting behaviors is not just talking about somebody that's acting poorly, but it also just might be on the group level. This group's getting confused. Are we saying that's poor meeting behavior?
It's just you want to have a healthier meeting. So you might have people getting confused. You might have the energy level dropping super low.
I see.
No one's talking. So we're not talking about just individual people, being bad. We're talking about anything that's causing this meeting to not be super healthy, right?
Sure.
So the first level of intervention is very subtle. You're doing things. Oh, here's another one. You might stand up if you've been leading the meeting from a sitting position. One of the things we teach is stand up and lead the meeting from a position of, a little bit of a position of power. It causes people to look more to you. It gives you a little bit more ease in air traffic controlling.
So that would be useful if you see the meeting starting to get out of hand.
Side topics, sidebars,
Sure.
Off topic. You might stop and say, hey, you guys over here, what do you guys think about this? I'm not a big believer in calling out individuals.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, what do you think, Debbie? Right? But hey, you guys are the engineers of our group. That's your guys' role. What do you guys think? So that's a way to maybe distribute the airtime a little better.
Sure.
So there's more we could say, but there's this first level of intervention that's really subtle. You're not actually calling out anything directly. You're just doing things that bring us back.
Mm-hmm.
Now, then we have the second level of intervention, which is kind of a group intervention where you actually call out the behavior, but it's not to an individual person. So, for example, you might say, "Hey, hold on, everybody. Shh. Let's all take turns." Mm-hmm. That's a group intervention, right? And side note, I love it when facilitators have the courage to do that. And you know what? Everyone in the room loves it. If someone steps up and takes charge, that's what they're looking for, right? So yeah, everybody one at a time. Or, hey, hold on, everybody. Hold on. Hey, no sidebars. Everybody stay focused here. Let's let Debbie finish what she's saying, right? Here's another one. Hey, can I just remind everybody, we made that commitment to no phones. So everybody put your phones away. And, there's a lot of these things that I just think people are hungry to have the facilitator do, because what you allow, you teach.
Sure. So should you only be doing, these direct group interventions if you see that it seems to be a group behavior, as in multiple people are violating your agreement of what meetings should look like? Because there's a tactful way to do this, and there's also the way of you see somebody doing the same behavior over and over again, and then you say, hey, everybody, just remember, let's make sure not to do the phones. Okay, at that point, it's so obvious who you're calling.
It's Debbie.
Right, it's always Debbie.
Right. I totally agree.
So I think that if it's a couple people violating it, That's when a group intervention is appropriate. If it's one person, don't do the kind of passive aggressive call out. Hey, remember everybody, we're not supposed to be doing this, and everybody in the room knows who you're talking about.
I literally just saw this, and it was so awkward. It was the one person who came in 5 minutes late.
Let me remind you what time we're all supposed to start.
Right. And the facilitator was not talking to the person directly. It was, hey, everybody. It was so obvious and so embarrassing.
Yeah.
So the answer is yes. We're looking for something that, hey, guys, here's one. Hey, could I just remind everybody starting next week, please do your best to get here and let's get started by 9:00. Well, you say that because there was 4 people or more, right? I don't have a magic number for that, but you're right. It's a general sense that people are starting to interrupt each other, or maybe people are over talking and some people are not saying anything. So it's this sort of general kind of reminder, and it feels good because, again, people are like, oh, it's nice that somebody's noticing this and they're doing something about it, right?
Yeah. And you do, just as a facilitator of a meeting, you kind of gotta have the gumption to cut these things off and address them when they happen. Because as soon as you start letting things slip, all those commitments that we talked about earlier that you made with your group, everybody starts forgetting about them because you're not actually fixing the behavior in real time.
Well, they basically write off the code of conduct in their minds because you're not enforcing it.
Yeah.
Now, enforcing it, again, can be even in this second level of intervention, right? The first level was subtle behaviors that aren't direct. This one's group intervention. It's still can be very kind. It can be very gentle. You're not mad. So I just think that this level of intervention is it can be done very gracefully, but you're showing that you're in charge and that you're committed to running a good meeting.
Absolutely. Now, that's a group intervention. Now,
we have 2 more.
Like we talked about, there are situations where it is just one person violating the meeting.
Violating the meeting is a little harsh, but yeah. So we have 4 intervention levels, subtle stuff, and then this sort of group intervention. The third is, like you said, Ethan, now it's Debbie, and it's only Debbie. Mm-hmm. And now you have a choice.
Gosh, dang it, Debbie.
I think we should just maybe think about, should Debbie still be working here?
You're fired.
Okay. So we're in a meeting now, and it's one person, and the subtle stuff, if you've employed some of those, don't seem to be working. You may have done a group intervention because it made sense. There was maybe some others as well. You may or may not have, but now you got this person. Is there a time and a place to say something in the meeting versus the 4th level of intervention where you would have a private conversation? And I think it's a judgment call, right?
So are you saying that oftentimes addressing that person in the meeting publicly comes before addressing them in private?
Absolutely.
That seems a little backwards to me.
Well, it depends on how graceful you are as a facilitator. And this is really why facilitation training is so important. So, for example, you're having your meeting and, let's leave Debbie alone for a while. Let's pick on David, right? David is, a couple times now he's cut someone off, right? Mm-hmm. And you're saying to yourself, well, I could wait until after this meeting and have a conversation. But 2 things. I would like this meeting that we're in right now to go well. Mm-hmm. And I don't want everyone to think that I'm okay with this.
Right, that you just let it slide.
Right. So what could I say? Hey, David, hold on a second. Let her finish her comment.
Okay.
It's very subtle. It's nice. It's, I'm not saying, David, shut up, or stop interrupting. It's a reminder. It's like, hey, hold on, David, let her finish. And I've done that. I do that in trainings all the time. I say, oh, hold on, let her finish. And I don't think anyone's offended.
No, that's fair. That's fair. I was thinking of maybe a more drastic type of individual level, or individual intervention when you're in a group, as in, hey, you know what, David? You seem to always be interrupting people during these. I'm going to need you to pay attention to that and hold off for a while.
Yeah, no.
Okay.
No, we're not doing that.
That would be a one-on-one type intervention where it, despite your subtle efforts to shut that down, or despite your more direct efforts of saying, David, let her finish, and those don't work, that's when you would go into more of a one-on-one. Hey, David, you seem to not be getting it. I need you to let people finish, wait your turn, and do some airtime math.
Yeah, I do a little more BIR, I think, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But yeah, in the meeting, you could say things like, hey, hey, hold on, sidebars, right? Hey guys, could you join us here? Or, hey guys, stay with us, right? So you're directly looking right at two people that are sidebarring, and it's like the third time they've done it.
Yeah.
And you're like, hey guys, stay with us. I've done that tons of times. And maybe they're slightly embarrassed, but I think by then when you've done code of conduct and you've made these agreements and you've done some subtle things, I think it's fair, right? Plus, again, it shows the rest of the group that you're seeing it and you're doing something about it. I've done, hey, could you put your phone away? I've literally done that. And
yeah, that's fine. Yeah, that would be still considered a direct group intervention.
No, I'm talking now individual. Like I literally have looked at someone in class and said, hey, could you put your phone away? Because we've already done the direct group intervention.
Oh, okay. So maybe I wasn't quite understanding, because you have a direct group intervention. You're not necessarily talking about one individual.
Not at all. That's here's the 4 levels of intervention. Right. The first one is subtle, where I'm not even calling any certain, I'm just doing subtle things to get things back on track. I'm not even calling out a behavior, right? The second intervention is group intervention, where I might say, hey, could everybody remember to put your phones away? Or, hey, everybody remember, everyone don't interrupt.
Yeah, you're right. I'm sorry. I was getting confused between one-on-one interventions, both public and private.
Yeah, so now we're talking about the third level, which is public one-on-one, right? So, hey, David, hey, could you put your phone away? Now, I'm not going to do that without ever having said before, we're not going to have phones in meetings or, common commitments or anything. That would be really embarrassing.
Right. These interventions are based off what you agreed on in these. Yeah. Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
So sorry, I was kind of a little turned around. One-on-one interventions, you have the public ones, which is what we were talking about. Hey, let her finish type of thing.
But you're doing it nicely and gently, but it's direct. Yep.
And then if those public, subtle interventions to an individual don't work, that's when you have to have a one-on-one in private.
Yeah, and it's either because the direct sort of thing didn't work, or you didn't do the direct group thing. It just wasn't appropriate, or you didn't do it. So, but now we're talking about somebody who either kind of chronically, lately I've done some around the person who chronically shows up 10 minutes late, right? I'm not going to directly call that out in public, but I'm going to have a conversation. Or the person who seems to, it would be nice if when they disagreed, it could be a little more graceful, because I can see that they're stepping on toes. I might not have a place to do that publicly, directly to that person. That might be pretty, intimidating or, embarrassing. So that would be a really good opportunity to have a conversation. And this is where we get back to our BIR. Listeners, you may remember, you may not, but we're not going to say you're not getting it, or you're going to just basically join with that person. You're going to believe that they mean, that they're trying their best. You're going to believe that they're not trying to show up in a negative way.
Right. And for those that are listening that can't remember what BIR are, or don't listen to the episode, it's go back to giving feedback that stands for behavior, impact, and then replacement behavior.
Yeah. So a BIR conversation, right? It's this is the behavior specifically. I'm noticing that, often, sometimes, right, as people are sharing, you tend to cut in and say some things before they're done, right? So when you do the B, it's pretty specific, and then get to the I. And this is why this is a problem. I think people are feeling X, Y, and Z, or, that person had more to say and they ended up not saying anything because they felt cut off. Hey, it'd be great if you could, this is the R, right? The replacement behavior. Allow some time, maybe wait a couple seconds after the person has finished speaking, and then say your thing. So I'll tell you what, those one-on-one conversations, I've done a bunch of those around meeting behaviors. For some reason, they almost always go pretty well. And I think the person feels, I think by the way I'm having this conversation, I'm not trying to embarrass them. I'm not shaming them, but I'm also saying, hey, I want you to help me, because these meetings, they're important and they can be really good.
Mm-hmm. I like it. Hopefully that gives you all a lot of new skills to look at, skills to consider, skills to start practicing, both as a facilitator as well as a meeting participant. I do think there's going to be a place down the road for maybe a part 3 on meetings. But in the meantime, again, like I said at the beginning of the episode, let us know if you have any specific topics you'd like us to cover. Just send us an email at contact@nashconsulting.com. Mike, anything else you want to say here regarding meetings?
No, again, other than they are really important, and take some time and energy on making them excellent, because you're going to see a benefit to the entire culture.
I love it. All right.
Until next time.
Until next time, over and out.